Good evening and welcome to the Glazov gang. I'm not Jamie Glazov, I'm Josh Brewster, filling in for Mr. Jamie Glazov tonight. Tonight's gang members are Mr. Ben Shapiro. He is the Shillman Journalism Fellow at the David Horowitz Freedom Center and the author of a book I like very much, Primetime Propaganda, the true Hollywood story of how the left took over your TV. And Shari Goodman from Act for America. She's a chapter leader. And over here I've got Mr. Rob Nelson. If you watch the show, you're familiar with all these folks, and we've seen Rob quite a few times. Rob is a former Fox News host, and he is the author of Last Call, 10 Common Sense Solutions to America's Biggest Problems. Welcome, gang members. Thanks very much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so tonight in the first segment, I think one of the interesting current topics right now is happening in Egypt, and it's been part of a long process called the quote-unquote Arab Spring. Now, I personally am deeply suspicious of most everything about the Arab Spring because I believe that lining up to vote for a bunch of jihadists is not democracy. And democracy without a set of individual liberties is not democracy at all. And in my view, I think that we're all cheerleading. Our media in this country, to me, is cheerleading. And I think it's great that we hope that there will be a change and that people will be active and they'll be participants. But to me, without a set of enumerated liberties, I think that the Arab Spring is nothing but a march toward another jihadist leader here or another jihadist leader there. Why don't I start with Shari tonight? Shari, you're from Act for America, you're a chapter leader. What do you think about what I'm putting out there in my suspicions about the Arab Spring?
Well, I think you're absolutely correct. I view democracy as a means to an end. I don't view democracy as an end. The end is liberty. And democracy without liberty is rather meaningless. We saw the democracy take place in Hamas. And the people there did vote. They had the means to do so. And yet they voted in a terrorist organization. So we have to ask ourselves, what is the meaning of democracy if it does not lead to liberty?
Let me go over to Rob Nelson now. Rob, what say you on this matter? You know, you're a guy who's been in mass media in many different arenas, and I just have to say, I think I'm suspicious of a lot of this Arab Spring cheerleading that I'm hearing.
You know, I mean, I'm going to agree to the extent that I think there's a tendency in the press to sort of cheerlead. I mean, I saw a thing today on, you know, you guys know this, but today was that they had the elections the last couple of days, and obviously, so the votes were being counted, and sort of saying, well, it's happening, you know, Egypt's finally there, and I thought, okay, so the cheerleading part happens, but on the other side of the equation, I don't think you can say democracy it has to be. I mean, you say toward freedom, but I mean, I think at the end of the day, a people is allowed to elect who they want to elect, and that's to create a democratic society. Sure. The problem that I see with Egypt, and I think the ship's left port. I mean, I think there's no turning this thing around right now in the Middle East. The freedom was great until it all suddenly we realized, oops, except the people that are going to elect hate the United States and hate Israel. So, on the one hand, I was really happy to see Egypt liberated from a horrible tyrant. It's created a dilemma for me because I thought Mubarak was a monster and horrible. Geopolitically, he was good for the U.S., but, you know, he was horrible to his people. But now I'm looking, going, okay, you know, 2-to-1 Egyptians want to nullify the peace treaty with Israel. It's like, you know, only 40% think it's important that women have the same rights as men, and less than that think that religions other than Islam should be allowed to practice. And I'm thinking, okay, on a personal level, I don't like what's happening, but on a philosophical level, I'm sort of like torn. It's like, what are your choices? Have a horrible dictator, or let the people choose? And in that region of the world, they're going to choose the Muslim Brotherhood. That's what's going to happen. Listen,
the truth will come flying out of the closet, I guess. I mean, we're just going to have to deal with it, but it does raise the issue of these friendly to the U.S. types. You know, how friendly were they, and how much of a puppet were they? Let's move over to Ben Shapiro here. Ben, what are your thoughts on this matter of the Arab Spring and the elections? As Rob Nelson mentioned, they're counting the votes.
I mean, I really do believe that the United States is the last best hope of humanity, meaning that what's in our interest is really what's most important here. And so, you know, when we look at Egypt, there's a tendency on both the right and the left to be too hopeful about the Arab Spring. On the right, the hope is kind of the George W. Bush, Woodrow Wilson hope, which is there is this beating heart of human freedom in every breast, and everybody wants, you know, the same liberties and democracy that we have here. It's clearly not true. There are people around the world who don't want that. And on the other side, on the left, we have this feeling that whatever people vote for is just fine, right? And from a multicultural, tolerant perspective, anything they vote for is just fine. Both are wrong. Just because people want, I mean, this sounds paternalistic and colonialist in a way it is, but if people want the wrong things, that doesn't mean that they should be allowed to have them. I mean, the fact is that Hitler was democratically elected. The fact is that more Russians supported the communist revolution in 1917, 1918 than supported the whites, which is why they won, and ended up subjecting their own people to 80 years of misery. So, you know, I think that we have a blueprint for what is the right way to run a country, and that's the United States. And whatever we can do to foster that in other countries is great. But I agree with Shari. I don't think that democracy is the be-all, end-all when it comes to this. I think you have to be prepared for democracy.
Go ahead. Rob, go
Wait,
ahead.
I just got to jump on
Go
that.
ahead.
Because, and it's interesting, I appreciate your honesty, because you're willing to honestly admit, you almost said it's paternalistic. It is. It's terribly paternalistic.
Yeah.
I mean, and I'm just going to say, I actually disagree about the right, the conservatives. I think there's nothing wrong with believing. I think deep inside most people, there is a desire for freedom. Now, that said, some countries the Chinese are a good example. They like to seem to have somebody leading them all the time. So the degree of freedom people want may be relative. But I think all human beings seek freedom. But my bigger thing to you is how can you say, no, I think if they want the wrong thing, I have the right to say that's wrong. To me, that's the very mentality that got Hitler to stay in power. It's like, ultimately, it doesn't matter what.
Well, no,
Can I jump in there?
Shari, jump in.
Because policy is shaped by our values. The Islamic world receives its values from the Quran. The Quran actually means submission. There is nothing democratic, and there is no liberty within the Quran. You must submit. So when we look at the world and what the rest of the world wants, I have to say you are looking at from your own ethnocentric perspective. It is not the perspective of people whose culture and religion is derived from the Quran.
Yeah, and let me jump in on this one. Very simply, non-Muslims are subjugated under Islamic law. And here's the thing though, Rob. It kind of ends, I think that what Ben is talking about kind of ends at the Egyptian borders. And anything that's going to go a hair over that border, it just might become our business. You know what I mean? But internally, if that's the way they want to go, Rob, then you know what? The West and Israel, don't you think everybody just should be prepared for it? But you see, what Ben is saying is interesting. You don't want to be paternalistic, but then again, if it's going to traverse their border, if it's going to poison this world, then we should do something. But within their borders, maybe you're right. Maybe we have no.
Well, I mean, this is the Iran example. You know, and again, I mean, and I went KBC. I was saying this 4 years ago. Like, you know, it's 5 years till they're going to have a nuclear weapon, and people were saying you're crazy. And then finally, the Defense Department comes out and says, last year says it's 1 year till it happens. But you know, I'm the first one to say, if I'm Israel, and even if I'm the U.S., I mean, we are. I'm saying. They can get the ability to make one nuclear weapon. Somebody better blow those bunkers up, even try, because if not, it's a mess. So I'm all in favor of interfering in other countries' affairs if it's going to harm us. I just have a problem philosophically with saying, well, you know, who gets to decide then? Who decides what systems are right? If you don't do our system,
well, I mean, I think
we'll put a dictator in.
Well, I don't believe in the morally relativistic perspective that all cultures are equal or that all systems are equal.
I'm not saying they are.
Right. So I mean, when it comes right down to it, I do think that the United States has proved itself to be the best system on the face of the earth, and I think that everybody at the table agrees on that. So that means that if we're going to implement, obviously you have to have hierarchy, right? We can't implement America everywhere. And it takes a given amount of time to do it in different places, right? Some places are closer to where we are on the spectrum. There are certain places that are much farther away, right? Like, you know, in the Arab world, very, very far from where the United States is. That doesn't mean we don't have a responsibility to cultivate groups within those borders that are going to, for example, be capable of taking over when there's a vacuum in power. One of the biggest problems we had in Egypt or in Libya or in Syria is that you're seeing all this turmoil. We don't even know who these people are. We haven't spent any time cultivating groups that are pro-America there and trying to work with them and trying to make it so that when there is a vacuum in power, we can have somebody elected who is good to America, who is good to Israel, and who is good to their own citizenry. So I'm very much against this kind of anti-colonialist idea that we stay out of everybody's business, and the real reason they hate us is because we're involved in their business. They hated us regardless of whether we're involved in their business.
Yeah, but what do you want to go back to colonialism? We just take.
Well, I'm not talking
yeah.
well, there's soft colonialism, there's hard colonialism.
Let me tell this
You
back.
want soft colonialism?
Yeah, well, capitalism is soft colonialism. Imposition of American values is soft
But then we're
colonialism.
putting dictators. That's the problem.
If you believe in our principles, and if our principles are good for us, why would they not be good for the rest of the
They
world?
might
Okay,
be, but it's not for us to
let me
force
jump
them
in
on
on that note.
But
Here's the genesis of this for me, Shari, and this speaks to actually what you're bringing up. I don't see Barack Obama or Romney or anyone really standing up and saying, here's the deal, until you write down that you can be a Christian, a Jew, a gay, a woman, on a piece of paper and show us a constitution that says it's okay to be a Jew, then there's no democracy. And there's nothing resembling what we have in the Western world as democracy. Half of us don't even show up to vote, and 90% of us don't show up for local elections. So this isn't about voting as much as it's about an enumerated set of rights. And what's scaring me here, and maybe since you've written quite a bit about television itself, Ben, very quickly, I don't hear key people in the media, and I don't hear key politicians jumping up and saying, wait a second, nobody's talking about liberties here. And that's my touchstone.
Well, I mean, tolerance and multiculturalism have trumped the pursuit of liberty. They're no longer, the pursuit of liberty is no longer as important as respecting everybody's values. And the problem is, when you tolerate evil, evil flourishes. I mean, tolerance is a wonderful word.
No, it's not just tolerance, it's equivalence. It's not just tolerance, it's equivalence.
Well,
Everybody's wonderful.
In essence, right. In essence,
Shari,
that's right.
Shari, jump in on that point. I'm talking about where is somebody going to stand up and say, where are the liberties? I never hear a word about liberties. Go ahead.
I think because we're focused upon the means. I think we're focused upon democracy, but we're not looking at the actual principles that we're trying to incorporate. Principles that we value, that we try to transmit to our children. We have been so indoctrinated by democracy and multiculturalism that we've lost sight of what are the principles, the foundation, the underpinnings behind it. And that's something we need to speak about.
Okay, Rob, I'm going to give you the last word on this, but I think that this does bring something up that's interesting. American diversity versus multiculturalism. Well, why don't you wrap this segment up for us?
I'm glad you brought that up, because I got to be honest. I hear, and I consider myself an independent, and I mean that in the truest sense of the word. And I hear from the right all the time, multiculturalism, multiculturalism. It's sort of like hearing from the left when they talk about, like, corporate greed, corporate greed. It's this buzzword. I'm not even sure what it means.
It's a virus.
Well, what it is and it isn't. I mean, diversity is a beautiful thing.
Yeah, but no, there's a difference between American. Hold on. There's a difference.
Diversity is awesome.
No, it's not.
Hold on, because I got
It's part of nature. Diversity is what keeps our
There's a
planet.
difference between
Diversity is a bag of marbles.
There's a
and you have evil
difference.
people in the
No, let
marbles.
me give you,
Well,
let me give you an
that is
example.
not good diversity.
Okay, we've got to wrap this segment up. I'm going to leave us with. Hold on. I'm going to
You
leave
can't
us with
scoop it
something.
out of that. You can't scoop the diversity out. I mean, you
No.
can't get to try to get the bad out would require you
I'll tell you
essentially
how
to
you get
do
the bad
things
out.
that go against our freedom and
There are
liberty.
certain.
Here's how you get
So
the
if
bad
we
out.
have
If we have a diverse society and there are murders in it, we have to get rid of
We
this
try,
segment
but
up.
they're going to be there.
Well,
I'll give you an example.
Otherwise, you're going to have Cuba.
Okay, this is going to be a real good night. It's not going to turn into Cuba. I'm going to wrap this segment up by saying this. There is a difference. We're talking American diversity based on equality, based on everybody having the same liberties, versus multiculturalism, which says U.S. and Israel bad, white people bad, everybody else is wonderful. I'm Josh Brewster for the Glazov Gang. Join us tomorrow for our second segment with this same fantastic gang of four. I will be back tomorrow to talk to you then.